Hello, everybody. If you're live with us, go ahead and send over a message with your name and where you're from. I'm going to start in a minute or so. If you're already there, thanks for joining us. Hello, Ashley from Tennessee. Thanks for joining. All right, well, it's 7 o'clock, so let's get going. Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy. This is the Veganic Growers Hour. We are live on YouTube here in Boileau, Quebec, which is about an hour and a half northeast of Ottawa, an hour and 45 minutes northwest of Montreal. Here it is 0 degrees, 32 Fahrenheit, and heavy, heavy snow. So we're in for a big snowstorm. Hello, Roxy from Toronto. Thanks for joining us also. All right, so this show is going to be all about seed starting and the veganic soil mix. We're going to get into that in just a minute. 2 weeks ago, we had a question come over at the end of the show that I would like to address before we start, just so everybody's on the same page. So this is from Monica in Danville, California. And she said, is this program just for beginners? Yes, it is for beginners, but also for the most experienced. The hope is that through these bi-weekly discussions, you will find the tools necessary. We will find the tools necessary to make you better in your gardening prowess, no matter how much time you have spent with working in the soil. Not every topic will specifically mention a veganic technique, nor will it necessarily be new to the advanced grower. However, every year, I basically follow the same rituals and routines, following the season as she flows. Like last time, we discussed gardening, planting, and seeds. As elementary and basic as that information is, it is also fundamental to the success of every grower. We would not be half as successful if we skipped this step or any of the steps along the way. So is this for beginners only? For all of us who are master growers, we must always start at the beginning every single year. So, Monica, I hope that answered your question. So, seed starting. Hello, Meg from Quebec City, and hello from Fiji. All right, cool. Thanks. I'm going to try to bring in something tropical. Seed starting is about creating diversity. Whether we do it in the ground or whether we do it in our homes or in our greenhouses, it is about diversity in our plantings. The benefit of starting seeds inside is that you can get a jump start on your season, especially up here in the cold north. We're not able to get in certain crops if we wait until our frost date is passed to go ahead and seed them outside. So we go ahead and seed start some things, especially in the Cucurbitaceae family, a little bit earlier so that we can get in some of our longer season winter squashes. But as we're discussing that, I'd like to say that as a basic general rule, there are some things that you probably always want to seed start inside. Now, if you live somewhere tropical like Fiji, then maybe you can go ahead and seed save or seed start anywhere or at any time outside. But up here in the north, we need to go ahead and start some things inside before either our last frost date, our warm and settled date, or as soon as the soil can be worked date. So the things that we want to start inside are alliums in our leek, which would be our onions and our leeks. Alliums be like our bulbing onions. They need a certain amount of time before that they will actually produce a bulbing onion, sometimes in the neighborhood of 150 and 120 days. And unless we don't start those inside, we won't get them. So that's a great example. Members of the Solanaceae family. So we're talking tomatoes, eggplant, sweet peppers, hot peppers, all of those we would like to start inside. Really anywhere there's a frost to frost season. Brassicas is another good example of something that we really would like to start inside. It gives us a jump start on the season, like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages. It is possible to seed those direct outside, but because they're kind of fussy when they're small, it's better to put them in go ahead and seed start them and keep them in a controlled environment. So I'm going to go again and give another shout out to Jeannie again from Calgary. Thank you. And Meg from Quebec City. Thank you for coming. Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank. Awesome. Thank you all. And Anne, old friends from Saint Lazare, Quebec. Thank you so much for joining. All right, so that is kind of what we want to think about starting inside. There's also other things also like celery, celery root, parsley, a lot of our herbs, especially our perennial herbs that if we want to start from seed because it's a little bit more fun, like oregano, wild marjoram, wild marjoram, self-seeding annuals like chamomile. These things, because the seeds are so small, it kind of makes sense to start them inside just to be able to control it a little bit better. Oh, and hello, H. Parker from North Carolina. Thank you so much. But don't be discouraged if for whatever reason you feel this is going to be a little bit too much for you to start seeds inside, because even if you don't want to start seeds inside, there is a ton of stuff that you can start outside. You can start your peas, your carrots, your beets, your beans, your radishes, turnips, lettuces, greens, green onions, even your cucurbitaceae family, even us, we can go ahead and direct seed cucumbers. You can direct seed a fast melon, winter squash, like the Three Sisters plantings of having corn, winter squash, and beans, climbing beans. You can plant those direct. So if you don't feel like you have the experience or you just don't want to get into it, you don't have to. Saying that, I think you should. So here we go. Seed starting. This is definitely the most technical aspect of growing. It doesn't get more technical than this. It's difficult. It can be, it could have you bang your head against the wall when you first start. But it really, once you get it and once you do it, every year you're going to want to. And especially up here in the north where our seasons outside, we don't even see the ground open up sometimes until May. For us, we can start in the greenhouse, and here at La Ferme de l'Aube, we start in the greenhouse the 14th of March. You can start planting stuff in your house at around the same time. So that is also the benefit. When you start getting that spring rush and that spring fever, you want to go ahead and start planting inside, go for it. So there's part of the technical aspects of seed starting inside, the things that are really important are heat, moisture, and whether the seed needs light or dark. 3 things. We'll start with temperatures. Every seed wants a specific temperature to germinate well. And what I mean by well, let's take lettuce, for example. Lettuce really wants to germinate between 55 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 12.5 to 24.5. Warmer than that, it really doesn't like it. Colder than that, it's going to take a long time. The thing about the germination temperature, if a lettuce seed wants to germinate in 6 to 8 days, any day that it takes longer to germinate, the chances of the seed germinating are just going to be less. Not only that, but there is a possibility of rot, and there is a possibility that the seedling will not be as vigorous. So there are certain seed catalogs that are really good. I have a chart that I'm putting together that will come out soon enough that talks about the germination temperatures and the amount of days that it takes. So that should be our goal. So another great example is peppers and hot peppers, sweet peppers and hot peppers. Sweet peppers and hot peppers will germinate in about 8 to 10 days. And their temperature range is 75 Fahrenheit to 90 Fahrenheit. So we're talking 24 to 32 degrees Celsius. That is really pretty warm. But again, if they're colder than that, they will still germinate, but there's that chance of rot. Saying all that, and those are two different swings. You have the high end of the spectrum, you have peppers, you have the low end of the spectrum, you have lettuces. So the range is basically 55 to 95 Fahrenheit or 12.5 to 33, 34 degrees. 12.5 to 33, 34 degrees Celsius. That is really cumbersome and really difficult to manage if you're trying to manage one set over here or something else over here. You have your brassicas, your tomatoes, you need different temperatures. What I can attest to is that absolutely everything will germinate between a range of 65 to 75 Fahrenheit or 18.5 to 24 degrees Celsius. So as long as we're maintaining that temperature, then our little seeds will germinate just fine. We'll have less rot problems. We'll have more vigorous seedlings because of that time that it really wants to break free. We're hitting it. So that's what we're going to shoot for. Catch that number again, 65 to 75 Fahrenheit, 18.5 to 24 degrees Celsius. In order for seeds to germinate, they must have constant moisture. Any day that they're not moist, they're not going to germinate. It's just not going to happen. So if they go dry, it's going to stop. It's going to stall itself out. So everything needs to be wet, wet, wet all the time until it germinates. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Oh, and that brings me up to another point. This particular show will be about seed starting and the seed starting mix. The next show on the 3rd of March, I will continue on with seed starting as we grow them up into seedlings, transplanting up to bigger pots, acclimating outside, where to grow them in your house or in your greenhouse, what you need. So it is going to be split up because, again, this is a very crucial part. And just like I mentioned with the first question of the show, it is very important that this particular show is about going step by step. So you can go back and look at it later. So you have all the steps along the way. I don't skip anything. We don't go ahead and then come back. We're really going to try to do it in order. I'll talk about something else in a second in regards to that. So all seeds require constant moisture in order for them to germinate. Brassica family, great example, want about 3 to 4 days to germinate. So they're really, really fast. So you put the seed in the soil, you keep it wet, and as long as it's wet for 3 or 4 days, you're going to see that little seedling come out, almost guaranteed. They're really, really quick. So light and dark. Does the seed need to be in the light? Does the seed need to be in the dark? For almost all seeds, they will germinate just fine in the dark. So this is really kind of cool with keeping the moisture and the heat together. So if you have a nice warm place in your house, or if you have a nice warm place in your greenhouse or your outbuilding, and you fill your seedling trays with soil, you put in the seeds, and you cover it, then it's going to guard the moisture, and it's going to keep it in the dark, which they don't mind, and it's going to trap the heat, which is super, super cool. So I shared a photo this morning of my germination chamber that one of my rescue cats, Leo, was testing out if it was warm enough. And that germination chamber actually closes. And what I did was I built something in relationship to the type of seedling trays I use. As you see, Leo is sitting on the seedling mat. And what'll end up happening is I will put the seedling trays in there, put wooden shims so that when the little seedlings do pop out, if I miss it by a few hours, they have room to grow. And then I cover it with some recycled plastic that we have lying around. And then I close it. And the heating mat will go ahead and warm it to the temperatures, whatever I'm trying to germinate, whatever specification I plug into the thermostat. I'm going to get into that here in just a second. And the heat rises up and it keeps all of the trays warm. And by covering in an insulated box closed, it stays warm all night. And that sits out in my greenhouse when it can even get down to minus 20 degrees Celsius. It's still resting 25 degrees Celsius inside the germination chamber. So it's like a 45-degree swing just by having that insulated box. Anyway, pretty cool. Check it out. There are designs online. If you want to know about mine, I can tell you that too. So most of the seeds can germinate in the dark, not a big deal. There are some specific seeds that want to be in the light. Anything that's really, really small, chamomile comes to mind. Celery is a good example. Ground cherries or cerise de terre, that's another great example. Those want to be actually left out in the light. They want to see the light before they germinate. Roxy, you sent a question about citrus. I will go ahead and answer that here at the end of the show. April from Kitchener, Ontario, hello. And Fireweed from BC, hello. And Matthews from BC, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. So there you go. Light and dark, heat, moisture. These are the things you need to know about your seeds. There are other things that sometimes will be said. One is called stratification, which means that you need to scratch your seed. Vernalization, which means it needs to sit in the fridge or a really cold place for, in your refrigerator for a period of time before the seed wants to go ahead and break dormancy. These are all things that will hopefully be specified on seed websites or in your catalog. And if it isn't, none of those things or either one of those things are not specified, then it means that your seeds will germinate just fine in a normal way. So my favorite method for germinating the seeds is in what is called a 50-cell plug flat. And you don't need to get this. I know that I've consulted some people in the last couple of weeks that have, and the reason why I like it, and I'm going to kind of show it to you here. The reason why I like it is because it can be cut down the line. It's all in increments of 5. It's very, very heavy duty. I'm not trying to sell you these because I'm not a vendor of them, but I'm just telling you what I use. So, and they're also about 2 inch by 2 inch, which makes them good size for pretty much everything. I've used smaller ones. I find I have to transplant up more quicker. I've used bigger ones, and I don't like that either. I've used soil blocks, which can be the same size, and soil block makers are fine. But what I found is that you have to have really a perfect seed starting mix to get a good block. And I still had damping off problems. Talk about that malady here in just a little bit. Anyway, so that's that. And what that sits in is what's called a 10-20 flat. This is pretty much like farmer, small grower, and homestead standard, what people use. And that tray fits inside. These are really, really durable. I bought them all, my entire stock in 2016. So we're going on their 7th year. I have yet to put one in the compost. So I know we don't all like plastic, and I get it. And I don't like wasting anything. And I'm not a big fan of using plastic, but the one thing I do like is that these things are made exceptionally well. I mean, these might last me a lifetime. Put a little tape on it and might be good. Anyway, like I said, I'm not trying to sell you them. I'm just telling you this is the best method. I'm always trying to show you the best methods. So that seedling tray fits inside. There's holes on the bottom for drainage. These fit on a seedling flat, a seedling mat, which I just talked about a little bit ago. The seedling mat there's one that's exactly the same size, which is basically about 25 centimeters by 50 centimeters. And the seedling mat heats from the bottom. And so when we put our soil on the top, we put in our bottom, which is so much better for everything, especially when roots are starting to form, than having the above lights come over. Lights are fine. I've used them before at my farm in Arizona. I used them and I grew hundreds, if not thousands, of transplants a year. I didn't know the seedling mat, and I didn't have the same greenhouse system or a nice south-facing window like other people use. I really recommend the seedling mat if you can find it. Now, there are seedling mats that seedling mats can do 1 tray or 4 trays. And the 4 trays is what I have in my germination chamber that I showed. So anyway, again, I'm not selling you these things. These are just a bet. You can Google seedling mats. The seedling mat will have a thermostat that you can buy for it that will allow you to set it all within 1 degree. Super, super cool. Get it to whatever temperature you want. Kind of up to you. If you don't want to use that, it's fine. There are many different models of seedling racks that you can use with lights. My friend Megan just had her Learn Veganic show, which is awesome, by the way. If you're not on it, take it. And if you're not taking it, go take it. She was talking about how you really want to have lights with chains that kind of move up as the plant gets bigger. And I did that in Arizona. That's exactly what you want to try and do if you have a lighting system. Me, I would still put a seedling mat underneath, because then you're still creating that warmth coming up from underneath, which really is what the plants are going to really like, especially when they're developing their root systems. So there you go. So you don't need to use these plastic trays. If you want, you can find whatever you've used in the past is fine. You can use refurbished, recycled products, whatever you have. I've heard about things like using old mushroom containers where people buy their mushrooms. You can make them out of wood. You can really kind of do whatever you want. Really, what it's going to come down to is whatever works well for you, whatever is transportable, whatever you can keep warm, covered, and water well, having good drainage underneath. Yeah, however you really want to do it is fine. So that's the deal with seedling. There was another question that came over about sprouting quince and cherry seeds. They can be left outside over winter to freeze thaw or put in the freezer. I don't know. I don't know anything about quince or cherry. I'm sorry. Another one about growing citrus in Canada from seed. Is it really different, or is just temperature and light differences? What I do know about citrus, because I did grow one once, as long as you have a viable seed, let's say you buy an organic lemon or you buy an organic lime, chances are pretty good it's not a hybrid. You go ahead and plant that seed, all of a sudden you start getting a tree. You're going to need to keep it whatever citrus temperature likes. Light, I mean, if you think about the tropics, pretty much the tropics are all the time. Fiji, you know this, 12 days of light, or 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. I mean, it's basically the same all the time. So, especially the closer that you get to the equator. So, growing citrus, 12 hours of light. I mean, citrus can get down to freezing, but in order for it to thrive, you probably wouldn't want to keep it any lower than probably 20 degrees. So it really depends on how you want to do it. I remember when I planted one, and I used to harvest them in Hawaii. That doesn't really help much, other than I got to harvest them. But when you plant the seed, it'll sprout pretty readily, and then it'll just grow, and you just need to keep potting it up and potting it up and potting it up. So there you go for citrus, Roxy. I hope that helps. And it's not really that different than anything else. It's just following the same rituals, the same routines, and you'll be fine. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, Yeah, so that's that. I'm going to get into the veganic seed starting mix here in a minute, but I did have a couple other questions that were popped over on social media channels this last week. One, so this is something that you don't start inside. My potatoes have started sprouting. Are they still okay to plant? That's from Eric, South Central Texas. Well, one, pretty cool. You can already plant your potatoes. But two, yeah, that's awesome. Sprouted tomatoes is what's called shitting potatoes, and I do that with mine. When I know that it's going to be time to plant my potatoes a few weeks before, I'll bring them all in the house at about 16 degrees Celsius, and all of a sudden they'll start putting out their little sprouts. Sometimes you see them coming out of what's called the potato eye. Sometimes you'll see them come out, and yeah, that's great, because all that does is create faster potato plants and faster tubers for you. So yeah, absolutely plant that. There was something going around saying, oh, you should pop off those sprouts before you plant. No, don't do that. No, you want that sprout. So go ahead and plant it in, because that's going to be a potato. So go ahead and plant it with the sprout. It'll be fine. There you go. Answer your question. Another question. This is just a general question. When do I start my seeds? Should I plant peppers now? They are so long. And I saw this on a gardening site that I'm on out of Toronto, and people are starting their peppers already. Wow. Okay. So timing. Last time we talked about 3 different dates. We talked about your as soon as the soil could be worked date, your warm and settled date, and your last frost date. All of your timing of your plantings is related to that. And if you did your garden plan homework from 2 weeks ago, or you already have your garden plan, in your seed starting plan, you should have already been able to delineate that. But just for an example, pepper. I'll take pepper because this one was the big one coming around. It seems like people like to plant their peppers 3 months before they plant them outside. Here, we will not be planting our peppers until about the 11th of April. We're going to start a week earlier than that, the chinensis, so the habanero, and also a Thai pepper. So I would go ahead and plant all of those, no matter where you live, about 8 weeks before your last frost date. And then you really should be fine. Peppers they germinate about 8-10 days. So a little bit slow to germinate. And then they're pretty slow to get going. Once they go and you want to transplant them up, they quite weeks to get them to the stage where then we want to pot them up into a bigger container. And for us, we always pot up all of our solanaceae, so our peppers, our hot peppers, our eggplants, our ground cherries, our tomatoes. We'll plant all of those up into like a 3.5-inch pot. It could be a 3-inch pot, it could be a 4-inch pot, it doesn't matter. But we do that after they have their first true leaves. But with peppers, we even wait a little longer, because with peppers, especially sweet peppers, and hot peppers, they're sensitive to the cold nights. So we want to make sure that when we're planting those, seeding those, that one, they're not too big before they go out, and they actually go in at the optimal time. So it seems like people in Toronto like to plant their, at least on this particular gardening site, want to plant their peppers maybe 3 months before outside. Me, I find that quite early. If that's what you want to do, well, go ahead. You just might have to pot it up a little bit more or a little faster. So there you go. All right. So a question just came over about, this is from the Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank. We'll be sprouting tomatoes, kale, lettuce, broccoli, cabbage, all in 50 trays. In one big room with the same temperature along the wall, 6 foot tall, south-facing windows. When should we start seeding for our optimal planting on May long weekend? Well, you're actually kind of lucky, because all of that stuff, the broccoli and the cabbage and the kale might take 5 weeks, but it could be ready in 4. Lettuce will be ready in about 3 to 4. And the tomatoes are a little bit different story. So back to the kale, the broccoli, the cabbage, the same family. 5 weeks. So count back from the planting May long weekend, 5 weeks. And in that same cell, the 50 cell, they'll be fine to plant out just like that. That'll be your little transplant. Perfect. 5 weeks. Lettuce, being that it's going to be starting to get warm, I'd say 4 weeks. Sometimes it's 3, but you should be fine. So 4 weeks for your lettuce, 5 weeks before for your brassicas, and then tomatoes, a little bit different story. So tomatoes, as long as the temperature stays warm enough in between, for all of that, I would say I would keep it all at 22 to 24 degrees. You'll be fine. The tomatoes are going to have about 15 to 18 days when they're going to stay in that little 50 cell, and they're going to start getting really tall, and they're going to put on their two true first leaves. Once they do that, you're going to want to take it out, and you're going to want to transplant it into what I was just talking about: a 3-inch pot, a 3.5-inch pot, a 4-inch pot. It won't quite be tough enough for you to just plant it out from the 50 cell. So that's it. So yeah, so want to get them out. So another comment that Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank just came across was want to get as much of a head start as possible without them outgrowing their cells. Yeah, brassicas 5 weeks, lettuce 4 weeks, tomatoes don't want any more than 5 weeks from the time that you planted them, but you will have to transpot them up. So there you go. Find some pots, and you're going to want to transplant them up after a couple of weeks. Yeah, so your 3 dates, warm and settled date. I'm going to say this a lot because these are so important. Again, it's routine, the same thing every year, all the time. We keep bringing this in, and then we always remember that these are the dates we're looking for. As soon as the soil can be worked, your last frost date, warm and settled date, and for your seedlings, you want heat, the temperature that the seed wants, constant moisture, light or dark. Most of the time, dark is fine until they sprout. Boom. There you go. So that's that. Veganic potting soil medium. Oh, this is a good topic, and this has been fun over the last couple of weeks because there's been all sorts of action going on in regards to this topic. And just to mention, there's something really interesting. Let me see if I have my note. Something really interesting happening on the 23rd, Wednesday the 23rd at 2 to 3:30 Eastern. Ian Tolhurst of Tolhurst Organics, who is really pretty much the grandfather of all of us in growing veganically, and he's been doing it for the better part of the last 2 decades, and I think he's been growing even for 40 years. He's going to be doing a live webinar on do-it-yourself peat-free growing mixes. So for anybody who wants to create their own homemade mix, this is going to be for you. I'll mention it again later, but just in case I don't, Wednesday, February 23rd, 2 to 3:30 Eastern, that's PM, do-it-yourself peat-free growing medium. Very cool. A little story. I got into, and I'm going to answer your question, Roxy, in just a minute. I got into organics because I wanted to break the cycle of industrial agriculture in my life. I had the unfortunate opportunity to see a concentrated animal feeding operation up close on a road trip back in 1997 that instantly turned me to vegetarian. I didn't realize the connection between vegetarian and vegan then. Do now, thankfully. But they're awful places. And when I became an organic farmer, I really believed that I was breaking that chain, that I wasn't going to eat animals. I wasn't going to use industrial manures. I wasn't going to use industrial fertilizers. I was going to not use any of that. But I was misconceived. It was a big misconception I had because I didn't realize that all the manures that were sold, whether it said natural or organic, I mean, in my head, I still had that idea that it was, I don't know, my local farmer who maybe had a few cows and was bagging up his manure. I mean, I don't know. And this is what other people think too now. But here's the thing. Manures are all coming from concentrated animal feeding operations. They're all coming from GMO fed animals. They're all coming from dairy stanchion cows. This is where the manure comes from. So even in organics, we shouldn't be using it, but in veganics, we don't use it at all. And this is one of the reasons why we don't want to support that industry. Also, at the time, I didn't realize that blood meal and bone meal, like I knew that they were a part of the rendering process of animals, but in my head, they were well raised anyway. Obviously, it's not true. All these products, the bone meal, the blood meal, it all comes from slaughterhouses. So if you really, really want, if you're not all vegan out there, I think probably most of you are, but if you're not, and you have any question at all manures are going to come from industrial animal agriculture. All byproducts come from industrial animal agriculture. Please don't use them. There is really no reason to use them. I have a formula for you. Only veganics breaks the chain of industrial animal agriculture when we're growing our fruits, vegetables, and herbs. This does it with the least exploitation of all beings, period. There's no other way. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. Organics doesn't cut it, doesn't even come close. Veganics is the only thing that does. So my seedling mix, I went ahead and posted it on the discussion of my Facebook event. And this is a seedling mix that I created. I had in one hand The New Organic Grower by Elliot Coleman. That's been in my bookshelf since 2000. He's been my mentor, at least from reading. And Growing Green by Jenny Hall and Ian Tolhurst, which is the veganic Bible on creating mixes, on ecosystems, on relationships with insects. It's a fantastic book if you don't have that one. So I had the two books, and I wanted to, well, first I wanted to try and find a mix, and I couldn't find one that had anything. Recently, I've learned that there is a mix called Pro Mix Mycorrhizae, which has peat, cocoa coir, perlite, dolomite lime, and then that's it. But it's basically just for seed starting. And this is what I found, that even if I was able to find something like that, it didn't have any fertilizer in it. Definitely didn't have any plant-based. I mean, there were mixes, but they were all animal fertilizers. So there were no mixes at all with even kelp meal in it. I mean, this was common at the time. So I decided to create a mix. And what I was looking for is I was trying to create a mix that, one, would do tens of thousands of seedlings every year. That was easy to replicate so that I could share it with everyone, and that I could make it very, very quickly. And that would have enough fertilizer in it so that I didn't have to water. Throughout my journey as a grower, there were 2 times I've owned 2 farms. And then in between, I kind of traveled around and was able to work and consult on some farms. And I saw that a lot of people were watering with a liquid fertilizer like I did back on my Arizona farm. And I've never liked this. It's that philosophy of feeding the plant. You can take a yellowing plant, give it some liquid food, and the next thing you know, it turns green again. And I always thought that was a little bit weird. I never liked it. You always had to be careful about when you did it. If you watered with liquid fertilizer when it was sunny, it would burn the plant. I didn't like it at all. So the mix that I came up with does not require any liquid fertilizer at all. During the time that the plants are growing, from the time that we seed them to the time that we transplant them outside. The only one thing that we grow where I actually give some additional fertilizer during the time it's growing is when we grow our bulbing onions. Onions stay in their trays about 9 weeks before we transplant them out. That'll be the first thing we plant on the 14th of March in our greenhouse. And with the seedling mix that I use, after about 4 weeks when they start growing, I do sprinkle in some soybean meal, which is about organic soybean meal, which has about 6% nitrogen, which is, when it says 600, it means 6% 6% per pound. So would that be? 6% per pound. There you go. Per pound of fertilizer. And that's how much nitrogen is in it. So 6% nitrogen per pound. So I go ahead and sprinkle that in. So anyway, my mix. And I'm going to get into something else about the mixes, like a peat-free mix also in a minute. So my mix is 5 gallons or 20 liters of peat, and I use peat, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Half cup of dolomite lime, because peat is acidic, and your plants are more going to be running towards neutral, which we'll talk about at another point, but this is your pH, and we need to raise up the pH a little bit, and the dolomite lime works for that. Mix that in and water it. Add 3 cups of perlite, 2 cups of vermiculite. Both of those are the perlite is for aeration. Vermiculite is for aeration and water retention, so it just helps hold more water. They're both volcanic rocks. They are mine, for example. I talked about that too in just a second. To that, I add a 1/4 cup of seaweed, a 1/4 cup of soft rock phosphate, and then I'll add in 3 cups of veganic compost that we make. Now, if you don't have veganic compost, you can just skip this step. You don't really need it. But if you do have it, add it in. And the reason why we use veganic compost and we want to put the compost in is we want to start getting those plants the understanding of the native environment that they're going into. And because of the compost that I make, that I will talk about on a future show also about making compost, you always want to put some native soil in your compost. And the native soil is going to bring in native microorganisms, and they're going to bring in native mycorrhizae into your native mushrooms, better way of putting it, into your compost pile. So it's a good way to inoculate it. And then if you're always taking a little bit of your compost and giving it to your next compost pile, then you're always inoculating it. And I always put a little dusting of native soil, and this just helps bring those microorganisms in. To all that, I add a fertilizer of a 1/2 cup of alfalfa meal, 1/2 cup of soybean meal, and that's both organic, and a 1/2 cup of mycorrhizae, and that will just help build the mushroom base in for the root systems. That particular mix has in the past grown 30 to 40,000 seedlings a year, really without problems at all. Transplanting them up into that soil is great. Sometimes I'll add even a little bit more compost, a little bit less peat, just to make it more fertile. Sometimes the plants have to stay in their pots for a little bit longer. So again, I put that, you didn't have to write that down. I put that in the discussion section of the Facebook event. That's my formula. I really like it. I'm going to answer a question from Roxy. She said, can I start my companion flowers in the same 50 cell tray? I had trouble getting the flowers to grow last year when direct sowing them outdoors like catnip marigolds. Yes, absolutely. And we do all of our flowers in our 50 cell trays because it's hard to manage out in the field. So yeah, do them all in the cell trays, or again, whatever you want to use, but I would start all your companion flowers inside. It'll just make it that much easier for you. Now, just a quick thing about peat moss versus coco coir. These are basically the 2 commercial mediums that are available today, that if you were to buy any kind of mix or buy your starting materials because you don't have the do-it-yourself materials to make your own potting mix or seeding mix, you're going to need to buy one of these. Because you really can't do it without it if you don't have these other materials I'm going to talk about in just a second. So why peat and why coir? Why not peat? Why not coir? Now peat, we know is bad. It's a carbon sink. It sequesters carbon. It's way up north here in Canada. It's wet. It's a fantastic ecosystem for the environment it's in. And the way that it's done is it's drained by machinery. Machinery comes in, dredges up the peat, and leaves it basically damaged forever. That's the ecological impact of peat. Coco coir is grown basically in Southeast Asia. The main countries of coconut growing are, let me see if I can remember this right, Indonesia, the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Brazil, South America, and Vietnam. So these are the main production centers of coconuts. So when I was a traveler and I traveled around Vietnam, what I noticed is that the locals there, when I went to the local villages, they would take the coconut, break it open, scoop out the meat, use the juice or the milk, the water, cook with that, then take the shells and burn them, and that's what they would make their fires with, right? So when I started becoming a veganic grower and I thought about cocoa versus peat, I realized that if I was going to be taking coconuts away, I was taking their livelihood, I was taking their food source, their energy source away from them. And for my part, I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do that. So I decided on peat, and a little bit further research. It's maybe the extraction part is bad, but the ecological impact of what they're actually doing up there is really not as bad as I had originally thought. Right now, there are only 0.03% of all Canadian peatlands are harvested for peat, and the rest are just not used. They're just left to be. There's also protections. They are even starting to figure out a way to replant them. However, that's done. There's a whole website on it. It's an industry website, so I can't particularly trust it. But what does seem to be true is that of all the world's peatlands, Canada has 25%. And of that 25%, they only use 0.03%. And that's what comes to all of Canada, because Canada gets all its peat from ourselves. And like 98% of all the peat in the United States comes from there. So yes, it is ecologically damaging, but we use almost nothing. So before you learn how to make your own mix, which I'm going to talk about here in just a minute, use peat. I would strongly suggest not to use coir at all, coconut coir at all. It does also seem that there's exploitation in that with people, with children, especially in the Philippines, and you can research this off if you want. So just, do your own research, decide for yourself. But if you need to use one or the other, I would use peat. Talking about your own mix. Now, the last couple of weeks, this has been pretty cool. And again, my friend Megan and Stefan have a Learn Veganic class that they just started 2 weeks ago, and they still have space. So if you still want to sign up, you can. learnveganic.org.com. Anyway, Google Learn Veganic, you'll find it. And what was really cool is Megan had an experiment that she did when she was working for a nonprofit group in Quebec. She had all these different mixes that she used based on 3 ingredients: composted chip branch wood, leaf mold, which is composted leaves, and veggie compost. Those were the only 3 ingredients that she had. And then what she created were all these different systems of trying to figure out what ratios would work. And the one that worked the best, from the pictures that we saw, was 1/3 veganic compost or veggie compost, 1/3 chip branch wood composted, and 1/3 leaf mold. And the plants looked like they were vibrant and they were happy. This has actually been corroborated by Tully, or Ian Tolhurst over in the UK, who recently wrote me and said that yes, what they use there is basically a 3 parts plant-based compost to 1 part wood chips. They call them wood chips, but it's pretty much the same thing, chip branch wood. And they add a little vermiculite or perlite, which is a mined volcanic rock that I use in my mix too. But again, it's the mining industry, so there's dredging, there's huge open pit mines. It's not a really good system. So it's very encouraging. And he's grown over millions of seedlings. His farm is quite a bit bigger than ours here. So there's your deal. You can have veggie compost that you make yourself. You can get some chip branch wood, which most towns will chip, and you can probably even find it at the nurseries. Most nurseries have it these days. And leaf mold. The only issue with it is that, from my thinking, and I have a big pile here of chip branch wood that I get from the town of Mont-Tremblant, that I mix with some already bought compost. And this year I'm making my own compost with the chip branch wood that isn't that isn't been composted down yet, that kind of sits on top, got too dry. I'm going to try to make my own compost doable state to that very kind of soily type state. You really need to have it break down for 3 to 4 years. Chip branch wood. I'm almost positive it's going to take that long. Leaf mold, you can get underneath the leaves, and the leaf mold that's there is going to be quite friable. You should be able to get that in a couple of years. And a good, well composted vegan compost, I can screen it out in a year, and I do use that. The problem that I have here is that it still has some seeds in it. So if I'm starting tomato seeds, I always have tomato seeds in my compost from tomatoes that we eat. There's seeds. Oh, when I'm seed starting, if I use that screen compost, if I'm getting the volunteer tomato seed or the tomato seed I actually want. So I only use, for tomatoes, I only use a mix that doesn't have my own compost in it. And when I pot them up, then I add the compost, because at that point it doesn't matter. I know the difference in size. So there you go. So 1/3 part of each, or you might be able to find them. I have been able to find something really cool called live mulch. This has been out of Gatineau, which is just a little bit outside of Ottawa. So if you're in Ottawa, you might be able to get it to yourself. But any other nursery might have it. And this live mulch is really chip branch wood mixed with green grass that they cut from the parks. And then they mix that together. This one was actually organically approved. So they felt that there wasn't that much chemical residues still left in the grass, so that they can certify it organic. So that was quite cool too. But those things are available. You can also find them from towns who collect from the brown bins. They're always not as good, because one, sometimes they put eggshells, and also sometimes they put, there's always like bits of plastic and sometimes bits of glass. But check around, check your local nurseries. If you're really into getting away from a peat mix and you want to grab this kind of compost, do that. However, if you're wanting to get started and you want to get a good mix, you can make mine, or you can buy that Pro Mix mycorrhizae. It's a little bit expensive, and you will still need to add a little fertilizer so that the plants go. So add some alfalfa meal, some soybean meal, some kelp meal, and you should be good to go. That's the potting mix. And I think that was all I had to say about that. So I think I have another couple of questions. Yeah, so what plant-based fertilizers to use? This is just general. So like I mentioned soybean meal, alfalfa meal, and kelp meal. Recently I've had an idea about flax meal. Now, not flax meal, because if you buy flax meal, they've taken out the oils. It's kind of like the same thing, and it's called linseed oil, right? They take out the oils. But if you buy flaxseed and you grind it, a journal article that I found from Germany, I think, but this was quite a while ago. This was probably 20 years ago. Said that the nitrogen content of flax meal or ground flaxseed was somewhere around 4%. So this is pretty cool. And what I noticed when I use these meals, like I mentioned in the onions, that I put soybean meal. I sprinkle soybean meal in between the little rows of onions while they're growing in their trays. What I noticed is it creates like mushrooms. It creates mycorrhizae, because it's also, when it mixes with the soil, I mean, it's alive. It has life to it. So the mycorrhizae starts working, the microorganisms start working, and oh my gosh, there you go. It's got even more life than it had before. So I really like using these meals for that. It really does seem like it adds more life into the soil. When you're talking about soils that probably, well, when you're talking seedling mixes, they're not alive per se. If you add compost, then they are, but seedling mixes are peat is, I think they steam it, so I can't really say that it's actually living. But there will be microorganisms that come with moisture and water, so that it will change itself. But So by adding these meals, it actually helps benefit them. It helps benefit the microorganisms to spawn. So there you go. So what plant-based fertilizers to use? That's what I would try. And there are others. There's a really interesting website called the NPK of Everything. And that has a whole bunch of things. And there was a question that came over that I am growing a few plants really high in nitrogen. Can I use these leaves or a tea made from them? Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to look at things like, and I'm going to talk about this a lot later because I don't use it on my seedlings because I feel it's a little bit too hot for them, but I do it on my plants. So if you're talking about, say, comfrey or nettles, you can absolutely make a tea from them. Again, it's a liquid fertilizer, so you got to be careful when you're watering your seedlings that make sure you do it at the end of the day. And watering seedlings at the end of the day isn't always fantastic because you want them to be a little drier than a little wetter. But yeah, you can. I've also wondered about drying comfrey leaves and drying nettle leaves, kind of grinding it up and just using it as a, kind of like you would think about using an algae, a dried algae. So April, that's a really good question. And yeah, I would do it. Do your own experiments. Comfrey is awesome. And this is going to be for a later show, but once I transplant everything, I make a nettle comfrey puree or a fertilizer by putting the nettle leaves and the comfrey leaves into a 5-gallon bucket or 20-liter bucket, filling it with water, and then I get 20 times that amount of fertilizer. And then I go out in the night about once every 3 weeks or once a month, and I just kind of foliar spray all the plants that are growing. Because it's so strong, the smell is so strong. I think that's probably why it burns the little seedlings, or it can. But what you could do, and I hadn't really done this before, but you probably could, if you do make your tea and you're making up your potting mix, go ahead and use that to water in your potting mix. So if you make up enough, then use that, and then the nutrients should settle into the potting mix. It may not be as strong as if you're using it as the liquid fertilizer, but I think it would work just fine. So anyway, there is definitely an option with that. Again, I will talk about those definitely later because I use those more often in the fields. Another question that came out, this was from Tiffany from East Berlin in Pennsylvania. If the bag says natural, doesn't that mean no animal products? Tiffany, no, unfortunately, it does not. So when you're looking at your bags of anything that you're buying, and it says potting soil, there are some potting soils out there. One I'm thinking of in Canada is called Gulf Green, and it's just potting soil. They have an organic version and a non-organic version, and it's just black humus, which is like kind of the blackened part of underneath the peat when they dredge it out. The peat, perlite, and lime, and that's all it is. And it's fine. It doesn't have any animal products. If it says natural fertilizer, then it is going to have animal manures in it. It's going to have poultry litter. It's going to have turkey litter. You can almost be guaranteed. And you're going to have to make the call, but they're going to tell you that it has manure. So anything that says natural fertilizer, or if the bag, even if it says organic and there's no chemicals in it, it says will feed for up to 3 months, it's going to have animal fertilizers in it because they just don't make them, unfortunately, with kelp meal or soybean meal. They should, but they don't. Yeah, so that's that. Those are the questions. As always, I'm going to grab my resources here in a minute. As always, if you have any questions at all, feel free to message me on Facebook. I'm more than happy to answer any of the stuff we talk about. I do understand that some people are in the tropics. Some people have started earlier. Some people are in California who can start their tomatoes today to be planted at the end of March, or even their peppers. I understand that because I'm using a baseline, I've decided to set it up a couple of weeks ahead of time. From what I do, I know that some people are even earlier than that. So if you have any questions at all, even if it's something other than what I'm talking about, just send me a message. I'm more than happy to answer. Resources. I've already talked about Learn Veganic. There's still space available. Take their class. I'm taking it. It's great for me because I'm watching other people who are super knowledgeable. Megan and Stefan are my mentors. They're amazing. Take their class. Veganic Agriculture Network has all sorts of really good information. The Vegan Organic Network, those people are always on fire over there. I already told you about the one webinar. One other event that's happening, I'm going to run over about, oh no, I got 2 minutes. One other event that's happening is a sustainable farming debate. And this is happening on Monday, February 21st from 11:30 to 1 p.m. Eastern. Check the Vegan Organic Network site for the sustainable farming debate. This should be really cool. This is taking on the whole idea of regenerative agriculture and how there is one side that believes that we must have animals, and then there's us that believe that we absolutely do not need animals to have a regenerative agriculture system. So check this out. Super, super cool. All these resources, there's so much information out there just for you to look at. Like I said, please go ahead and email me. Yeah, you can email me. My email is veganicgrower@gmail.com. I'm going to actually write it to everyone here at the end of the show. You can ask me anything you want. That's what I'm here for. This is what I'm here for you this year. So that's it. So I already said that the next show, March 3rd, is going to be on growing up the seedlings, keeping them warm, whether they're in the house, whether they're outside in a greenhouse, whether they're in a south-facing window, getting them to the point of transplant, and then acclimation. We're going to touch on this again next time because it's important. The one after that, so the 17th of March, is going to be all about preparing your fields. So stay tuned for that. Also on my Facebook page, I have the entire listing of every show from now until the end of October. So that's it. I want to say good night to everyone. Thank you for those that are new. Thank you for those who have come back. This is so cool. I really, really appreciate you. I hope to see you next time. Have yourself a great couple of weeks. Bye-bye.